many training facilities we have today if you're going to reduce the Army by almost 30%. And these are blind, across-the-board cuts. They're not done with any reason. So what I'm trying to do, along with Congressman Wilson and others, is to bring this to the attention of the public and get you to urge the Congress to avoid this catastrophe. We should take sequestration, the $600 billion penalty to be paid by the military for failure of the Super Committee, off the table before the election. Why? Our military planners have to start creating budgets for the next 10 years, and until sequestration is replaced, it's the law of the land. And the law of the land says in January 2013, we begin taking $55 billion a year out of the Department of Defense for the next decade, blindly across the board. And until that law is changed, our military is in a very terrible spot. So what does it say about our nation? To me, the number one goal, responsibility of the federal government is to defend the nation. Something that the states collectively are not doing and can't do. It's the federal government's responsibility. So I'm offended by the fact that we would put at risk the finest military in the world because we can't reach consensus as politicians. The President's budget avoids sequestration by increasing taxes on the top 1% and reducing spending in other areas of the government. Joe has led an effort in the House to repeal the sequestration by cutting $600 billion out of other parts of the government over the next 10 years. We're spending $3.1 trillion over the next year. $55 billion is something we can find in other parts of the government. I propose that over the next decade, when 3 federal civilian employees retire, only hire 2 back. That solves the problem. The problem is that these ideas have to be connected, and you've got to find a solution that will pass the House, the Senate, and signed by the President. So the purpose of this news conference today is to inform the Columbia area, the most friendly place in the world for the Department of Defense, that the Fort Jackson's very existence at stake if we don't change this. That all this community has done to support Fort Jackson, from the Chamber to our BRAC commissions, all of that hard work is going to be put at risk for no good reason. So I want to challenge the Senate Democratic leader, Harry Reid, to allow the Senate to come up with a substitute for sequestration. The House has done their job. We have not. The President has come up with a plan, but the President's job as Commander-in-Chief is to fix the problem. Governor Romney has condemned sequestration, but I think he owes it to the country to come up with a plan of his own to avoid this. This is not about being a Republican or a Democrat to me. This is about being an American. Whether you agree with the wars in Afghanistan or Iraq, the one thing that most Americans have embraced fully is those who serve. And I can promise you, this is a dangerous, difficult world in which we live. If we take off the table modernizing our force, Iranian engagements, which I hope we never have to go to war with Iran, but if you had to deal with a radical regime wanting to acquire nuclear weapons, you're going to need F-35s. You're going to need the F-22. You're going to need more than 231 ships to deal with a rising China and an unstable Mideast. So now's not the time to take the finest military in the history of the world and gut it. What does a hollow force mean? Some of you may remember pre-World War II situation we found ourselves in. After World War I, people believed there would be no other war. It was the war to end all wars. How wrong people were. This will not be the last war. My goal is to make sure that we have as few as possible, and we've never gone to war being too strong. I can't think of one war that was started by America being too strong. So what I am trying to convey here is that the threats we face are growing. Now's not the time to gut the force. And what is a hollow force? When we had to activate the military, call in the reserves, and engage in a draft to deal with growing threats in Europe in World War II, we had people coming into the military training with broomsticks, people in cardboard tanks. A hollow force means that you have a unit without the equipment to do their job. You have equipment without the personnel to adequately deploy the equipment. That is where we're heading. Everything we need to do to modernize in the 21st century cannot be accomplished with $1 trillion cut over time. The personnel reductions in the military are just mind-boggling. I'll end on this note. The Democratic Secretary of Defense said, if we do this, we will be shooting ourselves in the head as a nation if we follow through with sequestration. If we do not get this off the table, it would be impossible to modernize our force and engage an Iranian threat in the future. The Marine Corps Commandant, Deputy Commandant said, the Marine Corps in a sequestration environment could not deal with one contingency. So a lot is at stake. Let's start the debate now. Let it begin in South Carolina, and let's send a message to Washington. We've got debt problems. We've got a lot of problems, but the solution to our debt problem is not to destroy the military. You could do away with the Department of Defense and not change our long-term debt situation. But the day that you gut our military is the day that the evil forces roaming this globe are going to get on steroids. Now's not the time to send to the Iranian regime a message that America is going to begin to unwind the finest military in the world. Because to avoid war with Iran, they have to believe they will lose. And my message today is to make sure that no matter how much we're in debt, that America is able to defend herself and her allies forever. With that, I'm going to introduce one of the finest, most competent, energetic members of Congress when it comes to defense matters, the Personnel Subcommittee Chairman of the Defense Armed Services Committee, my friend Joe Wilson.